Hello and welcome to another edition of Pricing College with your hosts Aidan Campbell
and Joanna Wells.
Often in Pricing College we find new ways to show that we live in the past, and so today we are going to talk about cinemas, cinema pricing, and I predict somebody will say movies are not as good as they were in the old days. So I'll let Joanna kick off.
Yeah, I think we're talking about cinema pricing, partly as a response to that Bruce Springsteen dynamic pricing scenario that occurred a few weeks ago. I'm sure we discussed it in a podcast a few weeks ago, but it's been throughout the press, and it reminded us of back a few years ago when cinemas were struggling with their business model, less people going, demand for cinema and movies going down, rising of Netflix, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But so they were thinking about, how can we make more money, more margin as a cinema? What new pricing methods could we use? And they're really toying with the idea of dynamic pricing. So, when I look at that now, that strategy, and you think, it seems to be working in the ticket industry for other entertainment, why isn't it working so well for cinemas? Well, partly, through the pandemic, it's been very difficult for, cinemas to even test new pricing methods like dynamic pricing, because simply people weren't going out or allowed to go to the cinema for a long time. And still, there's that knock-on effect. On demand levels, you can see they're dropping. Very few people still going. But aside from that, before we go on to that, let's think about how cinemas really do make money. We often go how are cinemas still open today, considering very few people go? Well, the sales model really is based around the distributors really funding a lot of cinemas. Cinemas pretty much give away about 80% of ticket sales in the first 2 weeks to distributors for movies. And after that point, they pretty much keep all their sales. So for them, movies like Avatar are great because what they can do, they can bring out the old Avatar movie, the first one, because they sort of own the rights to that one now. They don't have to pay the distributors anymore. Well, they don't own the rights of it as well. They can keep all of the sales revenue from that in preparation, and then move on to forward forecasting for Avatar 2. And that's a great way for the cinemas to make money. At which point they could potentially use dynamic pricing, as they build demand for that movie. However, the customer experience and demand levels have to be optimised to be able to do that. And I really don't think at this point cinemas will be able to test dynamic pricing, hence it's not really been tested.
Yeah, I find there's a lot of interesting pricing things we can look at with cinemas. I think there's been an arms race, at least in Australia, with the quality of the cinemas themselves, like the rooms, the buildings, the location. Not so much the locations, because they've probably moved away from upmarket red carpet style CBD areas to malls on the edge in suburban malls, but. One thing that we've seen in this Australia gold class, even I don't think there might even be a platinum class, almost like very leather beds, fully flat seats. It's almost like the peripheral has really invested in that, and usually that's something we really push with, or we promote here at Pricing College, talking about the value adds that they do offer. You can have drinks brought to your seat. Some cinemas will have buttons you can press, and a waiter will come up and bring you stuff, which all sounds very luxurious, but. I think almost can we argue that, and I think I'll be the first one to say that, maybe the core of what they're offering has decreased. The quality of movies, I think a lot of people will admit, isn't as good as it used to be. I think the only movies that are selling out nowadays seem to be kids Disney style movies, or the never-ending stream of Marvel and DC Comics sort of action hero movies. But I think cinema in general. the normal cinema goers, I think that market has decreased. And to some extent, you have to argue that the core value of the cinema, which is the actual movies, there's a real risk there, a real issue there with what's being produced. Obviously, the cinema owners don't have an influence on that. So that's the first thing I'll add. Second thing, I just think we often talk on this podcast about revenue management and capacity constrained. And to a large extent, cinemas are capacity constrained also. There are a number of seats watching a screen. But I cannot remember ever being in a cinema in the last 5, 6, 7 years and seeing a cinema full, or even having difficulty in buying a ticket. So there's clearly that revenue management aspect isn't being optimized. And we're not arguing that you should be selling those tickets at 1 cent or 10 cents, but maybe that is a question people should be asking. What is the revenue management model behind these screens? I was at a movie maybe 2 weeks ago, midweek Thursday night, which used to be regarded as midweek shopping night, and I think we were the only people in the screen in the cinema, and it was potentially a 500 seat cinema. So you're really questioning the model there. Another thing I will add is. We talk, and I think we'll get into it later in this podcast, but some things I'd like to look at are loyalty programs that they have that they try to get you into, the rationale behind that. I'd also like to look at the geographic variation in pricing, where they charge you different to go to different locations. And I've personally experienced that, which I find a little bit strange. The actual differentiator is huge. And then the third one, I think, is... sometimes they'll try to sell you a subscription model whereby you can go infinite times for a flat fee, which traditionally was aimed at students and maybe even later school students. So those are models that I think are interesting, that maybe have they been fully developed. And of course, the classic of do movies it's more of a conspiracy theory that I personally like. The popcorn. Do cinemas favour bad movies aimed at teenagers because they eat more popcorn than old people? It's an interesting one.
Well, based on, if they look at their sales model, they really do. That's where they make their profit. It's on the concessions, on the food. It's literally pure profit for them. And I think a while ago there were some tests, price tests being done on dynamic revenue management on the concessions as opposed to the tickets. People didn't like the dynamic pricing on the tickets so much, but they optimise by a few cents on the food, which is already profitable for them. Now I can see, potentially cinemas are backtracked from that, and they're now utilising more like bundles using tiered pricing to upsell to, the large popcorn based on price, because there's very limited price difference, so why not get the larger version and the theatre makes more money. That's one that we all know. In terms of that, I just wanted to circle back to the customer experience that we were touching on before. I think, I'm sure consultants have come into major cinema businesses and said, really the number one thing to think about before you look at optimizing price or testing different pricing methodology is to really work on your customer experience, because that in turn will enable you to utilize and test these different pricing models like subscription pricing. The problem is you're not driving enough traffic to the theatre, and that's feedback from the market has said, because we don't enjoy the experience. Now, Aidan touched upon the point a lot of the theatres got quite run down, and there wasn't enough money being invested into the cinema, the room itself. Some cinemas, got these nice, lovely leather seats, recliners, reducing the number of seats in the cinema, thus reducing potential for that capacity constraint idea through dynamic pricing. Other cinemas then thought, well, let's not improve the cinema. Let's look at how we can implement dynamic pricing by potentially looking at when people buy their cinema tickets. If they buy it closer to the cinema, the movie date or time, then we'll charge more. People didn't like that. And then really all of those things, if they didn't really help boost the experience, it took it away from the experience. So thinking about customer experience, often cinemas that do well do well, and I'm thinking very much like the petrol stations, gas stations. They do well not just because of the product or what they're selling in the store. It's actually the site where they are, where they're situated. Are there restaurants nearby? Are there like entertainment late at night? Aidan made the point of most of the cinemas that are doing well at the moment. It's because they're showing movies for kids, but potentially if they built a customer experience for adults, and by thinking about what's around that cinema, would that actually bring more adults into the cinema? Because you think, I'm not just going to get, it's not just we're going to watch a film because I can just watch a film at home. I'm going to have something to eat. I might have a nice drink before I go in, and not the drink in the cinema. The gold class membership in a cinema. I rarely see anybody really in there, partaking in a nice drink before they go in. People prefer to have a drink with the dinner outside, then come in. So maybe I'm thinking here in boosting, the customer experience by thinking a little bit outside of the walls of the cinema, and partnering with entertainment businesses, partnerships, loyalty cards that look at how connecting, building a community outside of it, that sort of stuff. It just requires a bit more creative thinking. And then once that's done, once you're bringing the people that you want to attract into your cinema, then you can start testing pricing models.
Look, I think that's a great point. I'm thinking some of the local cinemas, in my area, and to be honest, they're deserts in the evening time. It's like you'd have to get in a car and drive at least 10 minutes to have a restaurant or somewhere. So the idea of having an evening out, it takes that away, it strips that away, and it's like when I think of the more successful ones I know of, there's restaurants, and some of the more recently renovated Westfields, big shopping centres, they do have restaurant options, bar options near the cinema, and they do seem to be more of a buzz, and it can create a date night atmosphere or stuff where people would go for an evening without having to plan, a second location. So, that is a big thing. Like, the other thing I'd say is cinemas, they've almost dumbed down. Like, obviously society has dumbed down hugely, but I think with cinema and entertainment, it's a bit like music. If you all go to the middle, the fan, and we covered a bit of this in Bruce Springsteen, where if you want people to pay top dollar and really be addicted to acts and bands, it's because it's not one size fits all. Some people love Bruce Springsteen, some people love dance music, some people love whatever, rap music, etc. It's the same in cinema, but in the mainstream cinemas, it's gone towards the popcorn selling, rubbish in the middle spectrum, and the more art house or that sort of aspect, there doesn't seem to be appetite for it, or is it just that it's not provided? So potentially that is decreasing the attendance as well when you minimise the offer. Again, in the pricing stuff we talk about, you optimise the tail. I don't see the tail of what's been provided being optimised, really. And even the peripheral, not just there's a cruise ship element to the cinema, of course, too, whereby they've got you captured. Once you come in the door, you're not supposed to bring in external food, etc. There's an opportunity to upsell you, clearly. And I don't think that really is developed much in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And to some extent, it's even become more middle of the road. It fundamentally is in the main cinemas. It's popcorn, it's a Diet Coke or a Coca-Cola in a large bucket style container, and a limited selection of lollies or sweets. I think even the pick and mix, which kids used to love, hasn't really seemed to come back, post-COVID. I haven't seen that really. And again, kids used to love that, and that was an element of stuff. But I just feel it's almost like in a shutdown or a slowdown of the cinema industry. I think there's clearly opportunity for upselling on, more. You've got them captured, some more ancillary services. Clearly, that can be provided, creating more of an atmosphere, building more of a community. Clearly, it's like cinema used to be, at least it used to be. Fans, it used to be, people were diehards of certain genres. They would go to the cinema on a regular weekly basis. You'd have season tickets, you'd have reductions. I just don't really see that happening. I know Hoyt's one of the cinemas where I'd be most used to going to. They have a loyalty program. Like that, to be honest, doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. It's almost like, they're giving you a lot of value back immediately just from signing a form or pay. I think it's $15 you pay annually, and then you save X% of every ticket sale. But it doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me. It seems to be almost, they just want that $15 up front, and then they're giving you back the $15 immediately. So it's a strange one, and I'd be open to people telling me that there is method behind this, but to me it doesn't often stack up.
Yeah, I sometimes think people go, this generation's different. All they want to do is stay home, watch their screens and watch Netflix. They don't really want to go out. It's a bit of a defeatist attitude. Like, because I'm thinking about this one restaurant I know. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's in a lovely, next to a beach, but it literally has nothing else around it. But they've made this restaurant a destination point in itself. And then after that, people can go to the beach. But prior to them, and it's a new business, right? But prior to them taking over the business, it wasn't a destination. There was tons of different types of restaurants going in that really hadn't focused on how they could, create this wonderful customer experience. So really what they did instead is it was an orphan experience. People just went and they didn't even go to the beach, even though it's a gorgeous beach. They just were like, I just want to leave. But they did it, and people go, and even millennials and the whole lot, all the young people, they get out of their bedrooms, they go to this place because it's giving them something in return, right? Cinemas can do the same thing, and I do think it's a cop-out for business to going, things are changing, we can't keep up. Yes, you can. You just got to think carefully and strategically about what your customers want, how you can connect and partner with different businesses to create an experience that is worth staying around for. You don't just go to the cinema to sit in a lonely, dark, dusty old room to watch a poor film. And that's where it's got to. We've got cinemas and distributors in the whole industry have to think differently. Now, thinking about that on the other side, what's happened to cinemas? They've been captured within the Westfield mall-type experience, which, as Aidan was saying, shuts down, especially in Australia, at 6 o'clock. It's a dead zone. And it's a dead zone partly because Westfield rent is ridiculously high and they can't attract niche and creative businesses in there for a long term before they shut down. So there's something with the whole ecosystem with, having cinemas in malls and reliant upon landlords who charge too much, which in turn negate the experience that bring customers in because the rent's too high. But then they argue, well, we need the rent to maintain such a big complex. Well, maybe this is the end of the mall, and we know that this is happening in America. However, what's happening in America isn't great either because that's just breaking down community at the same time. So, are we going back to the old school way of, high streets, independent businesses just clustered around actual areas that people congregate? They congregate around beaches in metro city, where there's life, people go. So rather than think we all go where there's life, let's get into the creative zone and create life and bring traffic to you rather than the passive reactive, I'll only go when I know there's a business case to set up a business and everyone goes to malls. They don't go to malls anymore. It's a dying business model. I think that's... I don't want to rant anymore, but I think you get my gist here. I think we just got to think completely different, get our creative hats on, start to reach out and connect with businesses, not these major malls. That's not the answer anymore. It's the niche players, it's the startups, and it's partnerships. And from there, you can build loyalty plans and pricing plans that are absolutely spot on.
Yeah, look, I think we're talking about a creative industry. In a previous one, we covered that. I think Hollywood often goes through these cycles of, the big corporates, and then you have, the new wave, the French movies, or you have even in the 70s where it was like the alternative movies came through, and then you had in the 90s where you had like the Quentin Tarantinos and this new wave of directors. Like, I think that's Hollywood's crying out for at the minute. Like, clearly everything seems to be produced by committee and by focus groups, whereby so you get movies that are basically cookie cutter, and that appeals to the middle section. But when you appeal to the middle section, it's you don't get high emotions, or you don't get people going to watch the movie twice, or unmissable. There aren't really movies that you cannot miss anymore. There aren't movies that people talk about much. And I suppose it all spreads down from there. At the end of the day, if people aren't overly fussed on going to the movie, the paraphernalia around it and all that, it then it's a habit that if people are out of that habit, maybe they won't get back into it. So, I would argue, there's fundamentally, and you need better movies to be watching is the first thing. And secondly, you need... there's clearly a pricing element about the peripheral around that, creating an evening out, creating an experience for people, and then it's trying to somehow charge them by optimizing the pricing, which to me, doesn't seem to really be happening. It just, is it... Like, at the end of the day, if people don't want to see the movie, they're not going to pay less or more depending on the day. So fundamentally, you need the movie first. But then there's got to be an optimization process that is the ticket too high? Are people not going because it's too expensive? But at the end of the day, should a cinema be sitting empty, during a peak time? And if that's the case, there's a severe issue. And are we facing a blockbuster video scenario where no pricing strategy change will rescue what is, a defunct business model? I'm not saying that, but, I think there should certainly be warning signals that people should be looking at this immediately and asking, is the existing model, does it work or not?
Yeah, agreed. And I don't think it's a defunct model. I just think they need a complete mindset change. There's no point doing tactical price changes and implementing new methodology if you just don't have enough traffic to optimize a revenue based on demand. There is no demand. That's because, as we were discussing, the whole proximity location is often wrong. There's no experience. There's no connection with other businesses. The movie itself is middle of the road and not drawing enough traffic in and of itself. And the experience around the cinema is dull. It's lifeless. The cinema itself is tatty, tired. Leather seats will not compensate for that. However, the model in itself, the whole industry, could be better. We know there have been great movies before which have driven in traffic. We know that when you put a cinema near a great restaurant, people go, oh, the restaurant's great, let's catch a movie after that too. It works. It's not rocket science, but you've got to start thinking differently and maybe breaking outside of the Westfield Mall premise, because I think that's capping revenue potential, and people are simply just not going to those sort of things anymore. So yeah, look, fear of repeating ourselves. I think that's kind of what I've got to say on that. And yeah, really keen to hear what you guys are thinking about this particular topic. And yeah, well, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, just as a last point, I wonder, is there the opportunity for small, regional, local, niche cinemas, to restart? It used to be that every major town had 10 or 15 cinemas, showing with one screen, showing one movie or one genre. Is there room for that again? Could you open a cinema in Sydney or Melbourne showing just horror movies, or showing just the latest, international movies or French movies or Italian movies? Is there an appetite for that? Would that model work? Would you, would that... Because at the minute it's dominated by the big players, the Hoyts, the Events, the major corporations, the Warner Villages. The small operators have left the market. Is there room for, we've seen pop-up bars reappear to create life again in CBDs. Is there a pop-up cinema? And I'm not referring to council-run open-air cinemas showing 1980s movies, safe, middle of the ground for families. I'm not talking about, slightly more challenging, slightly more things that people might, make people think. Is there room for that? But obviously that's entrepreneurial. It takes risk building. It takes love of cinema. And I don't know if love of cinema is there at the moment. So that's it from me today. We'll say have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.